Welcome to episode 13 of the SJX Podcast. I'm joined as always by SJX, and today we're talking about 20 years of MB&F and the long path that led to 20 free watches being raffled off later this month. We'll also discuss the Richard Lange Jumping Seconds, which just got an upgrade with a solid gold dial. But let's start with MB&F and the idea to raffle off 10 pieces of the new LM101 Longhorn and 10 pieces of a new Mad 1S. It's an unprecedented offer. What was your reaction when you first saw the news about this?
I thought it was kind of cool, because it's in a way it's a way of giving back to clients and fans, and it also shows how successful MB&F is. The fact that they can give away these watches, the fact that they got a decent investment from Chanel. Overall, I think it was a good move, and also as always with MB&F, it was very good marketing, right? The fact that they are giving away 20 watches at cost, at the cost of goods, their wholesale, whatever you call it. I'm sure they make that back from just the exposure, the chatter they get, because now the entire world is talking about the fact that MB&F is giving away free watches. Now, people could be saying good things, bad things, it doesn't matter. People are talking about the brand.
Yeah, we talked to Max on one of the early episodes of this podcast, and, it was really moving hearing him talk about the early days of the brand and how much he and the team and the friends had to fight to, create their future, which we're now looking back on and celebrating these 20 years. And, I think he expressed the desire to, want to give back to, the customers that took a chance on him, early in this history, but, was never really in a position to do so. But 20 years, like you said, kind of at an all-time high, this was that opportunity. He took it. I agree. I think it's pretty cool. Yeah. The watches are also cool. The LM101 Longhorn, I think that kind of black and silver color combination looks better in the more minimalist design of the LM101 compared to the chronograph and the perpetual, which are still great watches and actually fit better than I would have expected. I think maybe earning a reputation of being a short lug guy, but and I didn't expect it to fit my wrist as well as it did. But the Longhorns are pretty cool. It does have a very distinct wrist presence as a result of that, and pretty neat.
Yeah. The watches, I saw them at Geneva Watch Days, and they're very good looking watches. I'm sure if they were made for sale, they would sell very well as well. But on the point that you made, I think the key thing to remember is that many or most independent brands struggled in their early days, but very few independent brands can tell the story of that struggle as well as MB&F. And very few brands are savvy enough to give away watches for their anniversary.
Yeah. Well, maybe when, another brand that, we now look back and we say it's insane that this brand, had a slow start, but, think about Acrivia, think about how far they've come from those early days when, it was Recep standing at the booth in, Salon QP or, some of those early watch shows that he went to and, waiting for people to approach. And now, he would be absolutely mobbed if that were to happen again. Yeah. It's funny how time passes and gives us a new perspective. And that also may, we talk about independent watchmaking and the value. And there is, a thrill of the hunt, the thrill of the idea that you might be one of these early people in one of these future success stories, but it's really hard to do. It's sort of like investing, if it's you're going to be wrong more often than you're right. And you need a lot of liquidity to play that game. And so it's nice to see the success stories on the other side of that. And, really happy for Max and that team and what they've accomplished.
But like you said, it's exactly like investing. And I think the irony is that because independent watchmaking is so successful now, I think Well, I listen to a couple of podcasts once in a while of successful and famous investors on YouTube. You find plenty of them. Um, and I think very often the many of them agree that today's winners are very rarely tomorrow's winners. And all of today's winners in independent watchmaking were all the most unpopular watches you could buy at 40% discount 10 or 15 years ago. And today, where independent watchmaking is, I'm not sure that we'll see the same kind of winners because because of the simple fact that the brands and the watchmakers have it too easy. They can launch a time-only watch for 80,000 euros and sell 100 pieces in 5 days, which I think when it's so easy, I don't think the watchmakers will take risks. Instead, they will just produce what they know clients want to buy today, which is an open dial, every finishing technique you can imagine, front and back, hand wind, 39mm to 38mm, titanium or tantalum case, subscription pricing model. And, you know, it's so easy. So I think that's that is something to think about for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So, something that's a little bit different than that, on our last episode, in fact, we talked about how brands like Lange have a chance to, take market share from some of these independents. Lange has given a new dial to a watch that is, I think dear to both of us, the Richard Lange Jumping Seconds that debuted in 2016. There have been a few different small editions of this over the last 9 years, this one being probably the most extravagant with this solid rose gold dial. But you had a chance to, review this piece. I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts. 9 years after it first came out, is it still what you remember?
Yes, because I think in the first place, the Richard Lange Jumping Seconds is one of the most interesting Lange watches because it has a unusual but logical combination of complications. And for a complicated Lange, it's a very small watch, right? The Richard Lange Jumping Seconds has this unusual regulator dial with the three intersecting circles that's inspired by a vintage pocket watch. Lange makes two other watches with the same dial, and the other watches are like 42mm and 46mm. So this, by Lange standards at 39mm, is a very small watch. It wears very well. It feels like a Lange one, but it's very complex, right? It has a constant force, 0 reset seconds. It's just, and all of these complications, logically, thematically, they fit together. But the original versions were a little bit boring. The first one in platinum is nice, but it's a bit boring. It came out in rose gold, also a bit boring. The black dial was more interesting, was more striking. And now, you have pink gold, or people will call it salmon, and it's a fashionable color. It's bright, it's striking, it's even more interesting now. And I think this fits Lange's strategy of giving unusual or interesting dials to models that don't sell very well. Because if you look at the last four models that got a salmon dial, nobody would say any of those are the best sellers. None of them are Saxonia Thin or Lange 1 or Datograph.
Yeah. I think I still have a little bit of a soft spot for the first version in platinum, but that might just be my nostalgia kicking in. But to your point, I've always felt like this was a criminally underrated watch both within the Lange collection and more broadly within high-end watchmaking. And, it's a really strong option when, counter to, these time-only independent watches that we've just been talking about. This is a watch that is where the technical aspects of the watch and the aesthetic aspects of the watch are perfectly married. And you said it well. You said that the complications make sense together. And I think, in fact, they reinforce one another. The idea that, the seconds register has been positioned front and center to show off this jumping seconds, and that the fact that that's combined with the 0 reset when you pull the crown, it automatically resets the chronograph or the seconds hand like a chronograph. It even has a little vertical clutch that you can see on the back. And all of this powered by a 1 second remontoire. And and a discrete power reserve. I think we disagree a little bit on the execution of the power reserve display. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's a nice little elegant kind of if you know kind of thing sitting there between the dials. But yeah, this is it's a watch that deserves, I think, more esteem among the collector community. I know that it's a little bit weird, especially certain times of day where the hour and minute hands kind of cross over in the center a little bit. It's a little bit wonky, but that's, I think, a small price to pay for something quirky and unique.
And if you think about it, it is literally a small price. Well, by today's standards, the retail is like $100,000 US dollars, which is a lot of money for a watch. But by today's standards, it's actually not that bad if you think about it, considering where watches are today. I think it's actually a pretty decent deal for what you get.
Yeah, and that's something else that stood out to me is, this watch has been out for 9 years. The movement is unchanged. It has, proven itself in these different editions. It hasn't required, any known revisions or changes to make it reliable. It is, and yet the competitive field has not really gotten any more crowded. It's still kind of stands alone in its category. There's nothing, there's no kind of simple Remontois powered, time only Patek or Vacheron, for example. This is it's kind of a very instrument like watch, and that gives it a really distinct character.
Yeah, I think in the Lange the Remontois makes sense because it drives a deadbeat seconds, which I guess theoretically makes a watch displays the time more precisely because the second jumps rather than sweeps along. But I think also, I guess, from a very strictly technical point of view, a Remontois today actually is completely pointless because in the past, you found constant force mechanisms because power delivery was inconsistent because of technology, materials, mainsprings. Today, I think with modern technology, you get really, really good torque from the mainspring of an ETA 2892 or Valjoux 7750. And you don't need the Remontois anymore. But it's just a nice thing to have, I think, especially when it's paired with something logical like a deadbeat seconds or some other display that demands a Remontois, or even the Zeitwerk, right? The Lange Zeitwerk needs a Remontois for the jumping display. The FP Jaune Vagabondage needs a Remontois for the jumping display. And then it really makes sense.
And that's a wrap. Thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.